بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We hope that you're doing all well, inshallah ta'ala, tonight, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is keeping you all safe and sound and blesses you more, inshallah ta'ala. Thank you all for joining us for this blessed series, and I hope that inshallah ta'ala up until this point we've covered, with tonight is hadith number 35. I hope that everyone has been finding it beneficial, inshallah ta'ala. And as always, if anybody has any questions or concerns, they can reach out to us, bi'idhnillah. To proceed, so inshallah ta'ala tonight we will be covering hadith number 35 in our series, the top 50 most important hadith for a Muslim to know. And inshallah ta'ala, this is a very important hadith. A lot of people know this hadith as well. It talks about the brotherhood of the Muslims. And inshallah ta'ala tonight we'll explore it in a little bit more details and cover it bi'idhnillahi ta'ala from a lot of angles in order to really come to a sound foundation, which is the brotherhood of the Muslims bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So to proceed, inshallah ta'ala, this hadith is narrated by Abu Hurayrah radiyallahu anhu, where he says, La tahasadu. He starts it off, and then he says, of course, that the Prophet ﷺ has said, La tahasadu, do not envy one another. Wala tanajashu, and do not cheat one another. And we're going to come into this because it doesn't exactly mean cheat, but we'll mention what it actually means. Wala tabaghadu, and do not hate one another. Wala tadabaru, and do not turn your backs on one another. Wala yabi' ba'dukum ala bay' ba'd, and not let one of you sell over the selling of the other. This is the literal translation, of course. What it actually means is that you should never undercut, especially when it comes to business, and you should never affect the business of another Muslim, of another brother. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا, and be the servants of Allah who are brothers. Which means that if we're all worshipping Allah, if we all want the same thing, we have to be brothers in this. And then, of course, the Prophet ﷺ says that very important, very famous statement, Al-Muslim akhul Muslim. The Muslim is the brother of a Muslim. And this is where he really clearly establishes the brotherhood of the Muslims with one another. La yadhlimu. He does not oppress him. He does not commit any injustice against him. Wala yakhdhuluh. And he does not let him down. Meaning he does not fail him, right? Wala yakdhibuh. And he does not lie to him. Wala yahqiruh. And he does not belittle him. And then he says, At-taqwa ha-huna. Taqwa is here. Meaning, and we'll come into why he mentions taqwa right here. So he points to his chest 3 times, which is that taqwa is in the heart. Taqwa is in the heart, taqwa is in the heart. And he said it 3 times. بِحَسْبِ امْرِئٍ مِّنَ الشَّرِّ أَنْ يَحْقِرَ أَخَاهُ الْمُسْلِمِ. It is enough of an evil that a Muslim belittles or looks down upon his Muslim brother. And unfortunately, this happens a lot. كُلُّ الْمُسْلِمِ عَلَى الْمُسْلِمِ حَرَامٌ. Everything about the Muslim is unlawful, unjust. It's sacred for another Muslim. Damu, his blood, his life. وَمَالُهُ, and his property, his wealth. وَعِرْضُهُ, and his honor. This hadith is narrated by Imam Muslim. That's the end of the hadith. So it's a longer hadith, but as you can see, a lot of it has to deal with one another. And this is why, inshallah ta'ala, today, our hope is that we'll be able to cover all of the aspects of this hadith. Like I said, the main idea of this hadith is to establish the inviolable rights of Muslims with one another, and that we're all brothers. We all have the same goal, and we should be united in assisting one another, like the previous hadith that we talked about, but that how, inshallah ta'ala, really the goal is that if we treat each other like brothers, it should theoretically change the way that we behave on all levels, right? Like I said, this hadith is narrated by Imam Muslim. There are other versions that are in Bukhari, shorter snippets of this hadith. Other, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, all of them have different versions of this hadith, and this is why it's generally an accepted hadith that Muslims have agreed upon in terms of its authenticity and whatnot. This is what we'll explore, inshallah ta'ala, today. Some of the narrations, by the way, this narration is a narration of Abu Hurayrah. Some of them have Anas. Some of that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq who has narrated some versions of this. So it's generally an accepted idea, which is why a lot of Muslims know at least snippets of this hadith. And inshallah ta'ala, they know a lot of the different parts of this hadith as well. So for today, We will explore, inshallah ta'ala, word for word. We'll kind of break it down and then go over some of the deeper meanings that we need to go over, inshallah ta'ala. Number one, la tahasadu, do not envy one another. He starts out with envy. And this is because envy is one of those natural feelings that develops or that pre-exists really in a lot of creatures, right? The first sin of shaitan, and in fact the first sin that we know of, which is what shaitan did, is really of the type of envy. He envied Adam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preferred him. And so when it happens in general, what is it? It's the feeling that someone is better than me. And it's generated from that sense of competition, which means that the underlying idea, which is the sense of competition, in and of itself is actually okay. So it's very natural to feel envy. And as humans progress, meaning as we progress from being a very basic individual, an individual who externalizes a lot of the responsibility and what's going on, we have to really go forward, inshallah ta'ala, in terms of progress and in terms of realizing where does the fault lie, where does the responsibility lie. Is envy something that I should follow? This is why there's a debate among the scholars whether envy in and of itself, the feeling, not acting upon it, and we'll come to this inshallah ta'ala, the feeling itself, are we held accountable for it, right? And what's the remedy if we are? And if we're not, aslan, should we actually try to remedy? I believe that we should try to remedy it. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ started with it, because it is a starting point that can lead to a lot of other things. If you look, everything else that's mentioned in the hadith in terms of bad traits actually start from a sense of envy. Why is there a need to sell above the selling of another person, like undercutting somebody business-wise or affecting their business, if only for envy? Why is there a need to do najash? So it says in the second phrase, it says, وَلَا تَنَاجَشُوا, do not. Najash, by the way, is a type of selling where you're inflating the prices incorrectly. So a lot of times you'll find the translation is actually using this. But in our understanding of the hadith, we should use najash in a very general idea, not just applying it in business. Najash is where you have to resort to cheating and lying to get what you want, which is why najash is also one of the techniques that hunters use to catch the prey when they use traps. So setting up a trap for an animal is a type of najash. And so when we use it in business, you're setting up a trap that the person is walking into and they have no idea. And how this trap was set up historically speaking, of course it's still done today. Historically speaking, a person would walk into a store and want to buy something. And he says, how much you want to buy this? He says, how much are you willing to pay? He's like, I'll pay 20. And then the store owner would have hired somebody to walk in and pretend to be a customer. And he says, 20? That's actually this time, isn't it? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'll pay 25. And the customer, the legit customer, is like, 25? Wait, let me pay more. I want it. I'll pay 30. And then the guy, so he continues, outbids him. There's a bidding war now happening. That's actually a fake bidding war. The guy does not want to buy it. The other guy is actually hired by the store owner to falsely inflate the prices. That's the technical najash that exists in business. But like I said, it's really a trap. And so any trap that a person is setting up for his fellow Muslim is a type of najash. And unfortunately, we set these, people set these up. I'm not saying we. Hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, nobody is setting up traps for their Muslim brothers. But this is the idea. If you have to resort to lying and setting up schemes and doing all these things and conspiring with someone else in order to do it, a'udhu billah, this is not good. And a lot of times people resort to these type of schemes to get what they want. And here clearly the Prophet is forbidding it. But like I said, that whole scheme wouldn't have started if there wasn't envy to begin with, which is why he's starting it with envy. And I believe it's very important, because if we remove the envy, we wouldn't even do a lot of these other things. Wallah, if we purify our hearts, which is why the rest of the hadith is very important in talking about, the heart. This is why the phrase talking about taqwa is here. Because if we clean our hearts, with regards to our dealings with one another, wallahi, we'll be successful. Wallahi, we'll be fine. So the question is now, how do we deal with this envy? How do we purify our hearts from envy? First off, there is an envy upon which a person will build both actions and words. This is forbidden. There's an agreement among all scholars that is clearly haram. Meaning, if you do feel envy, and then you actually speak out, your words indicate some form of envy, whether backbiting, mentioning them in a bad way, talking about them behind their back, that all is generated from that, right? So that's in their words, or their actions like this, cheating them in their business, undercutting them, undermining them, belittling them, looking down upon them, trying to tear them down. Because ultimately, envy exists because you think that someone has something better than you do. Someone has something better than you do. Not understanding your place and thinking that the only way that I can elevate myself is by putting others down. This is incorrect. Even psychologists will tell you this is incorrect. You don't elevate yourself by putting others down. You elevate yourself by actually elevating yourself, working on yourself. And wallahi, if every Muslim does this, they just work on themselves, wallahi, will be fine. Half of the problems of the ummah, if not more, wallahi, will be erased. I hate to say this. You know what I mean? It sounds very, rudiment, but it actually is true. So how do we deal with this? If the reality is all of us have more of something that someone else doesn't have. Someone might have more wealth, someone might have more status, a better body, better looks, better car, better shoes, better whatever, right? And so we tend to have, this automatic in our mind. I see somebody who has something that's better than me. What do I do as a Muslim? How do I correct this within my heart? And so the scholars have debated among themselves. First off, the first initial feeling of envy, are you held accountable for that? And many scholars like Ibn Rajab and others like I'm reading today have said no. That initial fleeting, because it's very natural, it happens, right? What you do with that feeling is really where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's judgment is. And really we have to kind of figure out how to deal with that emotion and not be reactionary, but be proactive. And first, we shouldn't even be comparing ourselves. Number one, this is one of the techniques. And number two, if I do see somebody that has something that, I want myself or anything like this, I have to realize, okay, envy is where, the feeling now, if it festers, what happens to it? I want that from that person, I want it for myself. So then we have to fix that. I have to realize, no, I can't. He has to keep it. And this is why one of the worst types of envy, as many of the scholars have said, is the envy where the person wants what the other person has to be taken away from him, but he doesn't care if he wants. A'udhu billah. Meaning he intends evil for the person, and it's not even like he wishes to have it. He just doesn't want them to have nice things. A'udhu billah. Imagine that type of envy. This is why when I read it, I was like, what? This doesn't make any sense. But it shows a type of animosity and hatred that has festered in there. This is why we can't let the feeling of envy fester in our hearts. We can't let it stay there. We have to actually remedy it. We can't feel the envy. We should try to fix it as much as possible, is what we're saying. So it's agreed upon. We cannot act upon that feeling. We cannot let it dwell. We can't talk about it. All of these things. Additionally, if we have the fleeting idea, we have to correct our idea very quickly. I have to say in my mind and in my heart that no. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless whatever my brother, my sister, whoever has. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them more and grant me something even better. It doesn't have to be that. If you see somebody who has a better car than yours, or a car that you specifically wanted, like, ooh, I wanted to buy that same car. Or I wanted to buy that car. A'udhu billah. In a way, you're kind of wishing that you had what your Muslim brother has. And that feeling festering in your heart is not good for you. And if you act upon it, or if you speak it, and the thing is, ultimately our tongues betray us. Wallahi, they do. Because our tongues will almost always express what's in our hearts. And so the person, if they have envy in their heart, it'll be expressed on their tongue, which is why that's specifically, explicitly, clearly when it becomes haram. And if the person acts upon it, he'll start to ignore the person, start to look down upon them, be angry towards them. And a lot of times this will happen. They'll be like, in the relationship will change. And the person might be confused, like, why is the relationship changed? What happened? Before we were fine. And it's because it started perhaps with that envy. Like I said, envy itself comes from that sense of competition. So when it's regarding dunya things, obviously it's bad, we need to fix it. But if the sense of competition and envy here, hasad, is now in something worthwhile, like the hereafter, then it's actually good. It's something that we should actually explore even further. With the parameters that I don't want it to be removed from him, but I need to elevate myself. Now I need to really push myself so I can be a better person. This is why the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "La hasada illa fitnatain." There is no envy except in two things, right? A person who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given wealth and he's spending it for the sake of Allah, and the person is like, oh, I wish, that genuinely, I wish that I had wealth I can spend. That's good. Because he's wishing for something good. And he doesn't wish for the person to be removed from the blessing that he has. And the second one is knowledge, good knowledge, specifically knowledge of the Quran. He's able to recite it, he's able to recall it, act upon it, and the person is envious. He's like, oh, I wish that I could do the same thing. Those are good. And it should, of course, by good, meaning it should generate some actions in the individual so that he acts upon it, that he actually can build himself, so that he can, give, he can donate, he can learn beneficial knowledge, and do all these things that we know are actually good. And this is why it's very important for us to realize that, envy is very bad. And this is why in some of the hadith it says, فَهِيَ الْحَالِقَةِ. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, envy is al-haliqa, it shaves away. And then the Prophet ﷺ says it doesn't shave your hair, it shaves your religion, meaning slowly but surely, just eating away at your religion, at your deen, until it completely erases it. And then he says, should I not tell you of the remedy for this? And then he says, the remedy is that the person says salam to the other person. He's greeting him with the greetings of peace. And it becomes actually very good. In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he warns us of envy. He says, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْحَسَدِ. Beware of envy, because envy eats away your good deeds like fire eats away from the firewood, from a fuel source. Like I said, it's because it festers inside and it just keeps on going. This is why we have to realize what type of envy we have. We have to remedy it. If I see something that I genuinely, this is human nature, then I need to think, I need to be like, no. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless it. Allahumma barik. The Prophet says, Ala hal barakt. Did you not ask for barakah for it? Say, Allahumma barik. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless it and bless you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless it. And then you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on your own, not in front of him, of course, that Allah gives you even something better. And because a lot of times something better is not that individual thing. Sometimes we think that we need that or we want it, when in fact it's not good for us. And any wise person knows that this is the truth. You should ask for something even better for your situation. It doesn't have to be better, like a better car or better whatever, but you're asking for something better for you, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would know what you have, right? And this is why we kind of have to realize, you know what I mean? Like, the best way to remedy this is to really hope for good. You should be a good wisher for everybody around you, especially your Muslim brothers and sisters. When you're a good wisher, you actually are happy that they have good things. You know that your heart is okay, right? It's the exact opposite of envy. We're actually joyous when you see people have joy in their life. Like if I see somebody becoming successful, I shouldn't be like, well, I'm not successful, so I'm going to be jealous of this person who is successful. No, I should be like, you know what? I can learn from this. I can be better myself, and I'm genuinely happy for this person for being successful. Why shouldn't I be happy for them to be successful? We don't have to put others down to prop ourselves up. In fact, it never works out. When we put others down, we put all of us down, because it's one brotherhood, like we said. This is why this idea of envy is so detrimental. And of course, all of this comes from, like we said, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. If I truly believe, I should want people to be successful just like I want to be successful. I should want them to have nice things just like I want to have nice things. For example, obviously from an Islamic point of view, nice things would be good deeds. Not necessarily just good, nice things in the dunya, right? Of course, those are halal, if they're halal nice things. But we're talking about here, kind of that shift in focus from a dunya-centric view to an akhirah, hereafter-centric view, which is, of course, very difficult, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us. The next statement, he says, وَلَا تَنَاجَشُوا, and do not trick one another, right? This is the idea of, putting a trap or a trick in terms of business, but it could be in anything. You wouldn't have to trick somebody to get something that you need done, which is, don't manipulate other people, don't manipulate the people around you, don't, these types of things. A Muslim is always straightforward, very forthcoming, upright, considerate, accommodating. These are the characteristics that we should have. And it says, وَلَا تَبَاغَضُوا, and do not hate one another. And of course, hate is one of those terrible things that happens. And what's worse is when people start to hate on one another, thinking that they're doing good in terms of that hate. An example of this that used to happen is where people turn any type of conflict, any type of disagreement into a hateful situation. We can disagree with one another. We don't have to hate one another. We disagree with people all the time, but it should never lead us to hate. In fact, if you look, many of the companions disagreed with one another on religious matters. Now the thing is, for them, religion was the most valuable thing, which is obviously why passions are going to be high. See, the thing is, you'll know what a person cares about when, you know what I mean? What are they willing to really show hate in and love? Because hate is really the flip side of love. You only hate when you love something more than that which you hate. So when people are willing to show hatred, it shows that there's a level of love there, number one. But it also shows what's truly important to them. So if a guy, blah, 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 and turns out it was over a business deal, then you can realize that this person's preference is perhaps in that area. But when it comes to religion, a lot of times for people, deen is the most valuable thing that they have. But they're also willing to hate for the sake of the deen. Now, not all hate is hating an individual is something very difficult to do. We can hate the action, we can hate kufr and fusuq and asyan, but we shouldn't hate a kafir. We shouldn't hate a asi or a fasiq. We shouldn't hate individuals. And especially when it comes to religion. And this is why it's very sad when you find people who differ, for example, in a fiqh issue. I pray like this person prays like this, and eventually we'll have debates and whatnot, and then I'll start hating on a person for just praying differently, even though it's a fiqh opinion that exists in the books, it's existed for centuries. It's not going to be resolved today. It's not a problem. You believe you have a dalil, that's great. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for following the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But it shouldn't lead you to hate an individual, because what happens then is that they're never going to be open to that idea of truth that you have. And it becomes very sad. What's even worse is when people draw lines based upon their madhab or their school and not based upon the truth. For example, those original scholars who really started these madhab, obviously at the time they didn't realize that they were starting madhab. They were just teaching their students. Their students ended up teaching their students. Schools began to form as happens, with these types of movements. It was organic. Imagine the initial scholar who came up with an opinion on, for example, praying like this or praying like this or praying down here. I'm using this as examples, right? Whatever opinion he chose it based upon his ijtihad. Now, when he does an ijtihad, just to translate this, he's exercising his judicial prowess to come to as close to the truth as he thinks he can. Meaning he's doing his own judgment. He's exercising his fiqhi judgment, jurisprudence, from within an Islamic paradigm, based upon the knowledge that he has. And all of these people are very knowledgeable. We're talking about major scholars of Islam. Later on, students might advocate that position of their original teacher, not because they believe it's the truth, but because it's their teacher. So you'll see the problem that they fall into now is more tribal than it is anything else. He doesn't care where the truth is. He cares that this is my team. This is what my team says, and I'm going to argue for it. And this is actually very bad for the Muslims, because guess what? The original teacher gets reward for the position that he came out, even if it's wrong. Let's argue that it was wrong initially. He did his ijtihad. According to the Prophet ﷺ, when a person does ijtihad, right, when a person exercises, and he's right, he gets 2 rewards. But if he's wrong, he gets 1 reward, meaning he's still rewarded. For the student, though, he never did any ijtihad. He's just blindly following what his teacher said. And now he's drawing lines based upon, well, it's my teacher, so I'm going to argue the point. When in fact, we should always draw the line based upon truth and falsehood, based upon right and wrong. I'm not saying that the teacher is necessarily wrong, and obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is rewarding him. What we say is that there's maybe a more correct opinion, just to be respectful to our elders, our teachers, and the people that we rely on and whatnot. And so this is why we should, understand, inshallah ta'ala, where to draw the lines. And when we differ with one another, why are we differing? Wallah, this takes a lot of effort, right? I'm not belittling this at all. It takes the ability to do introspection. Like, why am I really advocating this opinion that strongly? Is it because I believe it's the truth, or is it because it's my group's opinion? Have I even investigated the other opinions that are out there? Do I even know what the other opinions are? And if I can't answer those questions clearly, then what am I doing? I'm now being just tribalistic. I'm following my tribe, whichever tribe it is, right? Here it's a madhab tribe. It's not a lineage tribe, but it is a tribe. And people become tribalistic in those ideas. So we have to kind of realize this. The Prophet ﷺ continues. He says, وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا, do not turn your backs on one another. This means that we face one another. We're not ashamed of one another. We greet one another. A lot of times you'll find Muslims, if they disagree, something happens, they might not even say salam to one another. And this is sad. We know that the Prophet ﷺ says in the Hadith that when the two hands of the Muslims meet, the sins drop just like leaves drop in the fall. Just by shaking their hands. Now, obviously now with COVID, if you fist bump or elbow or whatever, inshallah ta'ala, because your intention is to do the same thing, your intention is there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you that. But you have many people that aren't even willing to greet another Muslim. They just turn their back on them. It's like, oh, who is this? It's not even important. One of the best ways you'll see, always, the remedy is very basic things. Saying salam to one another, smiling in the faces of one another, really loving for each other what we love for ourselves. It's very basic, but it's so important really to remedy these things that are going on. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ, he says, لا يحل لمسلم أن يهجر أخاه فوق ثلاث. It is not lawful for a Muslim to do hajr, which is where he abandons his Muslim brother, turns his back on his Muslim brother, over 3 days. This is with regards to matters of the dunya, not the akhirah, matters of the dunya. And then he says, يلتقيان, they might meet. فيصد هذا ويصد هذا. This, in some narrations says فيعرض هذا ويعرض هذا. This person turns away, this person turns away. And then the Prophet, he says, وخيرهم الذي يبدأ بالسلام. The best of them is the one who initiates the peace, which means that as soon as there's peace between them, inshallah ta'ala, things are fine. Now, one might ask, okay, what if there is no, let's say, for example, before they used to be best buddies, they would talk all the time and whatnot, and now they just merely said salam, salam, and then they kind of went their ways. Are things solved? And some scholars have pointed out that perhaps not. It's not completely solved, right? Because the relationship isn't back to a loving relationship, even if they did say the salam. Now some have clarified and they said, well, this is applicable to families only, meaning if it's a family member, you have to do more than just say the salam. But if it's not a family member, maybe you can get away with it. Allahu a'lam, whatever it is. Obviously, we want things to go back to being good. We want people to be comfortable with one another, to talk to one another, and all these things. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala their remedies, wallahi, the relationships that we have with one another, inshaAllah ta'ala. The Prophet continues, he says, وَلَا يَبِعْ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَيْعِ بَعْضٍ. Do not undercut in your business the business of another Muslim. Don't sell above one another. Don't outbid one another. Don't undercut somebody's livelihood just because you think that you can make a quick buck. And this unfortunately happens all the time, right? And this is why we really have to realize, what are we doing? How are we helping one another? We should never cut off the resources of another Muslim. We should assist other Muslims. We should help them in their businesses, in their livelihoods, and in everything else. And I can't stress this enough, inshallah ta'ala. So the hadith continues, and then the Prophet, he says at the very end, conclusion of the sentence, وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا, and be the servants of Allah, brothers. Meaning you are the servants of Allah. He's reminding us ultimately of our role in this dunya. Our role isn't business. Our role, isn't to compete with one another. It becomes a competition, but that's not our role. That's not our job, right? It isn't to turn our backs on one. In fact, we need one another to turn our backs on. And do not, that feeling of envy, stop it in its track and try to change it to where you feel genuine happiness for one another. Because ultimately, when you realize your goal, that you are abd of Allah, you are a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we're all brothers in this together, then obviously we have to change that. So it's as if the Prophet ﷺ was saying that all of this is to kind of clarify what came before. And there's so many ways to remedy, right, the brotherhood. Saying the salam to one another, inviting one another, fulfilling their rights, which is, to say yarhamukumullah after they say alhamdulillah after they had sneezed, right? To visit them when they are sick, to really genuinely love for them what we love for ourselves. The Prophet ﷺ said, tahadu tahabu. When you give gifts to one another, it will increase the love. Wallah, you'll start to love one another. When you're giving each other things, sharing and whatnot, saying the salam, shaking their hand, and all these other things. Then he, of course, the hadith continues, and he says, Al-Muslim, Akhul Muslim, the Muslim is the brother of a Muslim. La yadhlimuhu, he does not oppress him. We know this. Oppression is one of the worst things that we can do. Wa la yakhdhuluhu, and he does not fail him, does not disappoint him. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, if a Muslim is being wronged and you're there and you do not help him, you do not assist him, you're failing him really, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fail you in another place. And of course, it includes both the dunya and the hereafter. So we have to realize that this is not something that, that we should belittle at all. And there's many hadiths to this effect. We should never fail another Muslim. We should always stand up for one another. And this is why even in the oppression, we should stand up. Meaning we do not help somebody oppress someone else. We stop the oppressor, and we help the one who is being oppressed. We don't fail each other. وَلَا يَكْذِبُهُ, and he does not lie to him. Obviously, lying is very bad. And this needs no explanation. Everybody knows that this is one of the worst things that we can do. وَلَا يَحْقِرُهُ, and he does not belittle him. He does not look down upon his Muslim brother. This, to be honest, is maybe, one of the worst things that we can do, because that idea of arrogance, or the idea that you're better than someone else, for whatever reason, is one of the worst feelings that a person can have. And then there's like a seeming interruption. Because after the interruption, he says, بِحَسْبِ امْرِئٍ, right? مِنَ الشَّرِّ أَنْ يَحْقِرَ أَخَاهُ الْمُسْلِمِ. It is enough of a sin that a Muslim belittles his Muslim brother, looks down upon him. That's enough of a sin. Meaning it is a sin so bad that it can actually lead you to the hellfire. Why? Because it speaks of the arrogance that's in a person's heart. And if there's one atom's worth of arrogance in the heart, we know what happens. That person does not enter Jannah. This is why it's very, very important that we never look down on anyone else. We never put anybody down. Because, wallahi, we have no idea. We truly don't have any idea who's entering Jannah and who's not. The Prophet was asked about the people of Jannah in a hadith. Who are the people of Jannah? He says, Kullu da'if. Every weak person. Mutada'if. Yani he's a person who, nobody pays attention to. Mawqufun ala al-abwab. In one version it says, person who madfu'un bil abwab. He's pushed, through the door. Nobody even pays attention to him. Right? He yakhfa ala nas. He's hidden from the people. The people don't even know who he is. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this person is very great. This person is so worthy. And then who are the people of the hellfire? And the Prophet ﷺ says, Kullu jawadin mutakabbir, ghalid, mutaghallid. In some narrations, he says, every person who is arrogant, vulgar, people who are disrespectful to others, people who think that they own everything, like they act as if they own everything. Those types of people are the inhabitants of the hellfire. The people who have tawadu', humbleness, humility, people who are unknown. Those are the people of Jannah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us among the people who are able to enter Jannah, inshaAllah ta'ala. Right? There's the famous hadith where the Prophet ﷺ asked the Sahaba about two individuals, right? And the first one he says, what do you say about this man? He said, this man, min ashraf al-qawm, he is from the honorable of the people, right? He, if people ask him, they will listen to him. If he asks for marriage, people will marry him. You know what I mean? He's a very honorable person. The Prophet sakat, he was quiet. He's like, okay. He's not agreeing or disagreeing. Then he sees another man. And he said, what do you say about this man? I said, this man, if he tries to get married, nobody will marry him their daughter. If he speaks, nobody will listen to him. If he tries to intercede on behalf of somebody, nobody will accept his intercession. And then the Prophet he says, Wallahi, lahada, this one man is better than an earth full of the previous man that you guys praised. Which shows us that our, subhanAllah, our criteria, what we look at in terms of who is important in our eyes, isn't the criteria that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cares about. This is why that interjection of at-taqwa hahuna, he says, taqwa is here, taqwa is in the heart. The fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that consciousness is in the heart. And that's what's important. That's what governs all of this, is the idea of taqwa. It's in the heart. Nobody knows it. You can have a person who you think is one of the worst, and in fact, he's actually one of the best people. And a person who you always assumed was one of the best people, it turns out he was one of the worst people. You don't know. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran. When it talks about inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, the most honorable of you with Allah is the one who has the most taqwa. It's not based upon his lineage, his skin color, his language, his wealth, his status, his career, his titles, his degrees. All of these things do not matter unless there is taqwa. The only thing that matters is taqwa in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously our focus should always be pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not anything else. This is why it's important for us that if we have the taqwa of Allah, that it should not lead to arrogance. We should not belittle others around us. We shouldn't do any of those things against our Muslim brother. And then of course the Prophet ﷺ, he ends the hadith with that very famous statement where he says, كُلُّ الْمُسْلِمِ عَلَى الْمُسْلِمِ حَرَامٌ. Every part of the Muslim is inviolable. It is sacred, right, for another Muslim to violate. You cannot, it's haram for anybody to violate these three things for another Muslim. What are they? His blood, his life, right, and his wealth, his property, and then number three, his honor and his dignity. And this is beautiful that Islam protects, a lot of other law systems out there protect the first two, your life and your property, but they don't care about the last one, his honor. But Islam cares about honor. Wallahi, Islam cares about the respect that you have. Because a lot of times your honor is actually more valuable than the first two. And I can tell you this, you know what I mean? Like anybody who's experienced this, their reputation, their honor, will know what we're talking about. Your honor sometimes is one of the most valuable things. And the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cares about it, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ here is encouraging it, is very important. This is why we should take care of the honor of one another, the respect that we have for one another. We should try to always, maintain these as much as possible. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll end with, there was a man who came to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and he tells him, if you're able to treat the elder of the Muslims like your father, and the young of the Muslims like your son, and the average, of them like one of your brother, why would you want to hurt any of those categories? So then obviously you should treat them well, right? That's a beautiful thing. And there is another Muslim who was giving advice. He says, with regards to other believers out there, do at least, one of these two options in three categories. If you can't be beneficial to him, at least don't harm him, number one. And if you can't bring him happiness, at least do not make him sad. And if you can't praise him, at least do not, do the opposite of praise, which is to put him down. Like we said, from the very beginning, the idea of putting others down and in order to prop ourselves up, this is very sad. And this is why purifying our hearts, purifying our internals, having the taqwa of Allah really is one of the best ways. And it'll be exemplified in the way that we behave with those around us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He helps us and guides us, and He forgives us for our shortcomings and our sins, and that inshallah ta'ala we can be among the people who are resurrected on the Day of Judgment as brothers. And if we can be resurrected as brothers, then inshallah ta'ala we hope to be entered into Jannah together, inshallah ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He protects the brotherhood of the Muslims and allows us to be better brothers to our fellow Muslim brothers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He forgives us for our shortcomings and our sins. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you for listening tonight. Inshallah ta'ala, we look forward to seeing you next week. بإذن الله تعالى. بارك الله فيكم. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.